What's going on, everyone? The MLS Cup Playoffs begin very shortly here with the beginning of the first round starting this Friday, October 25th. We just got through with the two wildcard or play-in games, whatever you want to call them. Over in the East on Tuesday, we had Montreal hosting Atlanta. Atlanta ended up advancing through penalties after almost squandering a 2-0 lead, but they just survived after at 90 minutes it was tied and it goes straight to penalties. And they ended up moving on in the East for the right to play Miami, who are obviously your Supporter Shield winners and favorites to win the entire thing. And then over in the West, we had an unusual situation on Wednesday where the 8th-seeded Whitecaps were facing the 9th-seeded Timbers, but the Timbers ended up getting hosting rights due to scheduling issues with the Whitecaps' home stadium. And so the Timbers hosted that at Providence Park, and man, it was probably up there, one of the top three, if not one of the worst, most embarrassing playoff performances of all time, with the Timbers getting absolutely bounced from almost the first whistle. It was a 5-0 just thrashing from the Whitecaps, who move on to play LAFC in that first round, who LAFC is your one seed in the West. So that sets up the final 16 teams now in the entire MLS Cup playoffs, with the beginning of the first round, which is going to span, depending on how long these first round series, which is how the format is, first round have best of threes going on. So you have to win 2 games to advance to the second round, and then after that we will get just simple one-legged, one-game knockout rounds after the first round. So it's only in this first round, as you see here, that we have these best of 3 matches. So the higher seed is going to host match 1 and match 3, with the lower seed hosting match 2. And the kicker to this kind of is as well, there's arguments for both sides as to who this format really benefits, because there are 3 matches, but in each of these games, no matter how many games it goes, if it's tied after 90 minutes, it goes straight to penalties. So it's sort of avoiding that extra wear and tear without extra time. But at the same time, it's kind of, you could argue on one side that it's giving these lower seeded teams more chances to advance, and it could be hurting the higher seeded teams because they might just be playing for draws when, usually they would have to maybe put more on the front foot in some situations. But I guess you could also argue on the other side that it's also giving these higher seeds, who are going to get obviously 2 home games in these series, if it even goes that far, it's giving them an extra chance to maybe avoid an upset and get their kind of footing right. So to me, I think just in general, the playoff format, the entire playoffs are spread out way too much, because also you have a kind of 2-week gap between round 1 and round 2. So that's something else that these teams are going to have to deal with even after this best of 3 round 1. You're going to have a long break, sort of like what we had between the second to last match day and decision day. And I just don't think that helps anyone. But regardless, this is just for everyone else to know how the format will be. So that will kind of definitely play its part in how these, especially these first games of these best of 3 series, go in round 1, and how kind of maybe the lower seed teams approach it, because they know that if they could just get it to penalties and have a shot, they can go over back home for match 2 and maybe, cause a crazy 2-0 upset if they get that first win in penalties. So they don't have to go out and win the actual game at 90 minutes in the first match. But for me, regardless, I think most of these higher seeds should have pretty easy times getting through to the next round, whether that be in 2 or 3 matches. I think the quality now at the top level, or the higher end of the seeds in both conferences, is pretty. They've been earned, the seeds, the teams that have those seeds. So I'm very interested to see how these first round series will go. It's only the second year we're ever doing this in MLS play. We had it last year, and then obviously we move on to the second round, the conference semifinals in each conference, and then, like I said, we'll be going over to normal knockout rounds from then. So we're gonna get into every playoff series that you need to know about. First, we're going to go over then each series one by one, and then I'll get into, after that, the rest of my kind of playoff predictor, how I see the rest of the bracket shaping out, and we'll just discuss everything you need to know about these upcoming MLS Cup playoffs. So we're going to start these series off in order of the scheduling for their first games in each series. So in that sense, the playoffs start with Inter Miami hosting Atlanta in Game 1. As you see in the bottom left-hand side of the graphic, that's the schedule for the entire series. The third game is obviously only going to happen if it's 1-1 after the first two, and that would be scheduled for November 9th. And that's the thing for most of these series is that, especially the first games of these first rounds of the first round, it's very spread out. There's only 1 or 2 games max each day, and I think that basically goes for the rest of the games in each series. It's kind of completely unlike the regular season, because obviously you had a full slate, whether that be on a Saturday or Wednesday, and that was just about it, minus some kind of makeup games. So I think this is a little bit better because it just spreads the whole schedule out. You can watch every match should you want to or be able to, instead of having to kind of put like 3 or 4 screens on at once like you would during the regular season. But anyways, let's get into this series. We have Miami, who are your Shield winners, your points record setters, versus Atlanta, who just scraped in. They've basically been treating this last kind of month of the regular season as the playoffs, and they've gotten by in flying colors, and they thoroughly, I think, dominated Montreal, at least in that first half, and then they kind of just wanted to protect what was theirs with that 2-0 result on the road, and that's just kind of how it works out. Sometimes you get on the back foot and bad things happen, especially when you have a kind of weaker defense such as Atlanta's. But this is an interesting series because obviously Miami is favored to win the whole thing. They have Messi, they have Suarez, all the young kids, and they're very healthy right now. Matias Rojas might even get back into the mix sometime in this series, depending on how he's been progressing. But what's interesting is that these two teams have had very tight games this season. Atlanta actually won here in the regular season at Chase Stadium, and then like about a month left in the season, about a month ago, it was with Messi coming back with one of his first games back. It was a 2-2 draw in Atlanta. So Miami hasn't beaten Atlanta this season. Atlanta's played them very tough, and I think Atlanta, like I talked about in the build-up to their wild card game, have just been generally much better on the road. They've just enjoyed that challenge, and their defense as well. Their tactical setup has been pretty impressive, and they kind of have the players like Sabalo Janize and they're kind of the strikers they kind of mix between. Now with Moranchuk back in the fold, they're an interesting team to say the least. I don't think Miami's path will be that simple. I think there's definitely some teams that can hurt them, especially if they go on in advance here like they should still and play, say, Charlotte in the second round, because Charlotte has also played them very tightly. So I obviously they're probably going to like steamroll up until like they should probably meet the Crew in the conference final. But I definitely think there are easier matchups they could have had. And just so far, we've just seen they haven't really figured out Atlanta. They haven't figured out Charlotte, or at home specifically. But obviously, the playoffs change that. Being healthy changes that. Messi changes that all by himself. And the other thing for Atlanta here, especially in this first game, is that they were coming off the decision day on Saturday and had to go where they were in Orlando and won that final game to sneak into the playoffs. And they had 2 days rest and had to go up to Montreal for that wild card game. And then now have to go all the way back down to Florida, to Miami on another only 2 days rest before this game Friday. And so it's certainly not in their favor here regardless, but even especially considering that, I mean, it's hard not to just see Miami steamrolling them here. And Miami's always probably good to give up a goal anyways. Atlanta has just been kind of taking that underdog mentality, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of approach Atlanta takes, because you just assume they're going to be tired, and if Miami can score early, it could get very ugly for them. And then you have the rest of the series. I think Miami is going to want to get this over with as soon as possible. And yeah, Atlanta at home, like I said, hasn't been very dangerous either. So as much as Atlanta has had their number, it just seems inevitable that Miami will find a way, even if they maybe look a little shaky defensively as usual. I just think, like we saw on decision day when they were going for the points record, like you go down 2. I know it was the Revs, but like they just find a way, and then Messi can come on in 20 minutes and score a hat trick. So it seems inevitable at this point. If the kind of schedule wasn't against Atlanta, but still it's kind of their fault that they had to put themselves in this position where now they're barely fighting and scrapping to stay in and keep their season alive. So for me, this should be an easy Miami win, at least in the first game. And I'd be shocked if this goes to a third game back at Chase Stadium. I just think even in penalties, if Atlanta can force penalties once, that would be a huge win for them to at least take it to there. But I just don't see it happening. I say 2-0 for Miami. So the second series that gets underway is Galaxy taking on the Rapids over in the West. This one is on Saturday, October 26th, for the first game of the series. And to be honest, this would have been an interesting series, in my opinion, had Colorado been fully healthy. But they have suffered some really crucial injuries, to say the least, in the kind of weeks or so leading up to the playoffs. And as a result, kind of paired with their just general poor form in the final month of the season, they are now 7th in the West, and I just don't see them being that competitive in this series. I think the Galaxy get this one done in 2. Maybe it goes 3 just because of their kind of how they faltered on the road, and that will probably be the reason that if they don't make it to the MLS Cup final, that will be why they don't. Because like we saw on decision day, they fumbled against the Dynamo, and now they have to go and they're second in the West instead of first, which they were hanging on to. And if they eventually meet up with LAFC in that conference final, then it doesn't favor them. They have loved their home form. They are unbeaten at their actual home stadium, Dignity Health Sports Park. And just to get back to this series, that's where we kick things off. For the players missing for Colorado, to get back to that as well, we have Mihailovic, who had a very nasty kind of ankle injury, who I don't think will be returning for this series, and Zach Steffen, who suffered some sort of injury in the USA camp during the most recent international break, and he didn't play in their decision day game against Austin. And then also you have, who was it? Bassett, who has picked up a knock of his own. He's kind of been training, but he's I wouldn't say he's 100% to go or start at the very least, especially for this first match. Cabral, actually, who I mentioned, has been dealing with some sort of injury for some months now, but he came back actually, so that's a big boost for them. But I think Bassett and obviously Mihailovic mean way more to this team in terms of their build-up, their attack. And so for that reason, I just see the Galaxy cruising here. We even saw them going on the road in Colorado in this last month of the season, and they picked up a big win, which boosted their chances highly of securing that 1 seed. But obviously, like we know, they fumbled it on the last day. So regardless here, their home form has been impeccable. They're fully healthy. Royce has come back from a slight injury. Paintsel had something, but he's been back. Everyone was healthy on decision day. Everyone should be good to go here. And the Rapids defense, after losing Bombito, and just in general, without your number 1 keeper in Steffen, hasn't really. They've kind of lived on the edge. They have had good numbers attacking wise on the road, some pretty high numbers, one of the best. But on that same front, they've exposed themselves a lot on the other end, and so that's where I'm leaning here for the first best bet of the show. This is going to be specifically for just this game 1. And so I'm taking the Galaxy to score over 2.5 goals. We're getting plus money here. And I was kind of debating between this or their spread 1.5, because it's basically the same price. But to me, it's basically the same kind of bet, because Galaxy is probably prone to giving up a goal. So in that sense, if you want to take the spread, you probably need 3 here. So to me, I would just rather trust the one side of the ball. And there's obviously the possibility of, with those Rapids injuries, that they maybe play a little bit more passively and try to sit back. But I just don't think even if they try that they're a team that is going to be able to hold the Galaxy and hold the Fortress down for too long. And once that comes crumbling apart, obviously they're going to open up more. They can't just hang on for like penalties in that sense if they're down. And that's when it'll really get out of hand. So I would rather just trust one side of the ball here. If we get a 2-0, then that's, you just have to put your hands up and say, unlucky. But to me, I don't think there's a difference between those two bets like I talked about. I think this Galaxy side in general should just be rolling through their side of the bracket. But I think this attack is just undeniable, especially in this first game at home where they've been so menacing and just positive in the attack. Jovic is back as well, who I haven't even mentioned. And I really like when he's good to go as one of that true 9. So I think they're going to start this playoff series off with a bang. Maybe depending on Colorado's approach, it could take a little bit longer for them to get going and open the scoring. But still, I think they've left it even late sometimes, and they know how to just continue piling on the goals and putting these teams in the dirt, especially at home. So that's where I'm leaning with. For me, I think Galaxy for the whole series get this one done in 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 3 just because of Colorado's home form. Maybe one of these injured players miraculously comes back for that second game and pushes it 3. And, one of these games could have penalty, especially in Colorado. I feel like the Rapids could maybe force penalties and survive that way. But to me, Galaxy should have little to no problem advancing in this series. Whether it takes 2 or 3 games, who knows? But for this first home game to start the series, I see no issues with them just rolling here against the Rapids. Moving back over to the East, where on Sunday we actually have 2 games, one in the East, one in the West. The first of those being Orlando versus Charlotte for game 1 of their playoff series. This is 4th versus 5th in the East. Orlando barely held on to that final home playoff series spot with 4th, despite losing on decision day to Atlanta. And so they get the host here for this first match. And the best they've ever done in their kind of shortish history has been getting to the second round. So they're not very used to deep playoff runs, especially under Oscar Pareja. They've kind of fumbled, especially in some much better positions, much better years that they've had regular season wise. They still haven't reached very far. And here they obviously turned the season around very late. They picked up some fantastic home form, and the lineup tinkering they did with that kind of front 3 or 4 has worked a lot. And Charlotte, on the other end, this is only their 3rd season, first under Dean Smith, and they've now made the playoffs for the first time ever. So congrats to them. And it's the 5th seed, so they've looked it the whole season, mostly based on their just defensive record, the best defensive record in the entire league, with probably the goalkeeper of the year down the line once the awards come out in Kalina. And this is an interesting series. I think for me, I think Charlotte has the potential for an upset here. That's what I'm calling. I don't really have a strong lean in terms of, any bets, but that's just where I would go. I think Charlotte, especially in this format now where a draw gets you straight to penalties, I think they are more than capable of doing that in this first game and stealing it on penalties or potentially even winning. And then back at Charlotte, I just don't see many teams giving Charlotte fits back at home. So this could be kind of wrapped up in 2 for Charlotte, in my opinion. But I just specifically don't see them losing at home, and they can at least force a game 3 here. And I think if they get 2 shots at Orlando on the road, I think they can figure them out. I think as much as Orlando has turned things around, Charlotte is just too strong defensively. But I mean, both these teams have question marks for me. I just think Charlotte's road form has been much stronger than Orlando's road form. And I know Orlando hosts 2 games, but we've kind of seen these kind of cracks like we saw on decision day. Sometimes they're still not, even though they're fourth, they're still not very convincing in terms of like just that quality that you see from not even maybe the top three with Cincy. Cincy's had their own problems, but they just that top, they're not an elite team. I know they're going to be hosting this playoff series 2 out of 3, but I think this is as kind of as tight as it gets in these playoffs. I think it's one of the true coin flips we have in terms of a series, and I just like Charlotte based on their defensive record. I think if they go with Aguming as well as at striker, then good things will happen. I obviously can't know what the lineups are going to be like, but that's just my opinion. I think also Pep Biel has been coming into form since being signed as the DP, and I just don't see Charlotte going out easily if they do. But this is going to be the first upset I'm going to call in the playoffs. Sunday's second game is back in the West, where we have the 1 seed LAFC taking on Whitecaps, who had to go through the wild card but completely turned around their form at the end of the season, where they lost 4 in a row to end the regular season. And like we talked about, they just dismantled Portland 5-0. So they're kind of a hot and cold team, and both these teams are very, very healthy, full strength going into these playoffs. But it just seems like LAFC Cherundolo has had Sartini's number the past couple of seasons. Even last year, this was the same series in the first round, and LAFC beat Whitecaps 2-0 in the series with a sweep or whatever, so it's called, if you want to call it 2-0 a sweep. But anyways, it just doesn't seem like anything is going to change. The only way Vancouver can force an upset here is just about the finishing, just more directness, in my opinion. I think Vancouver's tactics will probably be their undoing here. It's just they usually just get a little bit too stagnant when it comes to their ball possession, and LAFC will definitely give them the ball, and that just leads to their style of play they love to play, which is on the break, on the counter, very direct. And it just doesn't seem like the Whitecaps have figured that out. The big thing going for the Whitecaps that we saw in that international break makeup game between these two teams, which LAFC did win in the last seconds, but the big thing going for the Whitecaps is in that game we also saw how they could take advantage of LAFC's set piece weakness. Whitecaps are one of the best set piece teams in the entire league, just in general. But in that game, they scored a set piece goal. They scored the first goal in that Timbers game in the wild card on a set piece, and so that's one route they can take. You have big players, a big striker such as Brian White, a lot of willing runners. They have a lot of midfielders who put in a lot of effort. It's just about finishing your chances, and I think they have the potential to force a third game because of the way this kind of draw to penalty system is. But yeah, I with a fully healthy LAFC, I think they've just know how to break this team down for the most part, and they shouldn't have too many problems beating this team. Maybe with Stuart Armstrong now starting all of a sudden, like he did against the Timbers, maybe he could be the spark that might make this scary for LAFC, but it really depends on the tactics we see, the system we see out of Sartini, what kind of lineup. And to me, Denny Boanga is just on a mission. He owns this team specifically as well, as much as LAFC as a whole owns them. And so I'm obviously going to pick LAFC here, but a third game wouldn't surprise me, just based on the weaknesses LAFC has. They're still waiting for Murillo, actually, as their only kind of injured player at the moment, one of their better defenders. But still, they have been one of the strongest defensive teams in the league. They should start this series off with a win at home. And yeah, to me, both 1 versus 8th seeds in this entire in the playoffs have kind of differing things, because Atlanta has kind of had Miami's number but Miami is kind of destined to go very, very far and probably do the double. Meanwhile, LAFC has owned the 8 seed in the Whitecaps in kind of the opposite. And so, but the Whitecaps have kind of bolstered up, so to speak, and they've gotten very healthy. So, can that many times of losing help Sartini figure it out of how to get by this team? I just don't know. I just think I just don't see it happening. I mean, if it does, it's going to take a shocking effort because LAFC as well on attack is just, I just don't see Whitecaps outscoring them. They're going to have to really bunker down, really stay true to their tactics. And so it's going to have to be through at least forcing a third game through, such as a draw that goes to penalties and you get fortunate. So that's where I see the series headed, but I'm going to favor LAFC. Hard to bet against them. Moving on to Monday's first round game ones. The first of those two is between Cincinnati and NYCFC. And despite the seeds in this matchup, I think this has another series that has potential to be very tight and a potential upset. It's very hard to call because Cincinnati has really prided themselves under Pat Noonan as being a very tight defensive team, winning close games, and that just really has been the case this year. They've opened up a lot due to the losses they've had on defense, and they've tried to fill those gaps, but with the two center back signings, but it just hasn't really happened. And so you're kind of found in the situation where you have to kind of go to outscore teams, but on the other end, they kind of have a bit of a lack of true striker depth, options that are just delivering, because the two young guys, Kelsey and Valenzuela, they did kind of step up in the first half of the season, and it was kind of also Lucho kind of making them look better, maybe because of the how much space gravity he draws to himself and giving them kind of easier chances with his playmaking. But they signed Gio during the transfer window to come back, who used to be on St. Louis. But, this second half of the season, it just feels like none of those three have really earned the starting role, so to speak. You've seen Kubo playing that striker role up top in a two-striker setup. And it's really been down to Lucho and kind of the wingbacks like Orellano making the big plays, making the big moments to kind of spark this offense. And so that's kind of why I don't see them going too far. If they do win this series, they have to match up with the Crew. You would think the Crew will get past Red Bulls, so you could set up a Hell is a Real derby in that second round. But they're also on just upset watch here. But on the other end, you have NYCFC, who is just a very young team in general. I think they've overperformed expectations for this season. And they've been a very streaky team as well. They haven't been a team I've been very, I guess, kind to or right on most of the time. I've had a very hard time, just like reading those games and predicting them. But on the other hand, they're what could be their undoing as well is that their lack of experience with this current core, and to the fact that their road form specifically has been terrible. They went on decision day, could have secured the 4th seed because Orlando lost on decision day. They could have secured the 4th seed with a win, or I think maybe even a draw at Montreal, but they got shut out for a loss. And so that just hurts your momentum going to the postseason. They could have had a home playoff series host rights, and now they don't. And like I said, poor away form in Leagues Cup. These two teams met, and Cincinnati got the better of NYC. So both these teams, a lot of question marks surrounding both, just in general, in terms of general consistency, and that's kind of been the drop off in terms of the entire Eastern Conference from Miami and Columbus. The rest of these playoff teams are very, very hard to gauge for the most part what kind of teams is going to show up. And so I think this has huge potential to go 3 games, especially with, like I said, in most of these series, how they are, this one out of most has a lot of potential draws to penalties, a lot of random moments. And so NYCFC upset wouldn't surprise me based on Cincinnati's form as well. But at the same time, if I think Cincinnati gets to that third game, then I think that home field advantage will be enough. I think Cincinnati will figure it out. I feel like Pat Noonan and just this team, despite their defensive struggles, just kind of seem to get ready for the playoffs a little bit more, and maybe they'll approach it differently defensively, even against a team like this, like NYCFC. I think they can get by, and I'm just trusting as well. On top of that, if it gets a little tighter, I'm gonna trust the team with the solidified star in Lucho Acosta to do the business, and maybe even Orejano to assist that. And just deliver that one extra moment that gets you through. So that's, I think, is the difference for me. But NYCFC definitely worthy contenders in this series. Wouldn't be surprised, but I think we're gonna get that Hell is Real derby in the second round. Monday's second game that gets the series started with game one is another 4-5 matchup, this time in the West, with Seattle taking on Houston in Seattle. Both of these teams 2 times MLS Cup champions, and just as much as they couldn't really separate from each other in the seeding and standings, I don't see much separation between these two teams. I think this could be another coin flip, but I am going to give the edge to Seattle in this series. I just think, as we saw in the matchup about a month ago in Seattle between these two teams, Seattle, I think it was 1-0. Houston's tactics have just been not all there this season. I also don't think they have the players to kind of justify the tactics they've been playing. They've been very stagnant, very possession-based, but the rhythm, the tempo just hasn't been there. They haven't also been getting service to their DP striker, Ponce. And they also have some lingering injury issues with Hector Herrera and Bassi, who did get back on the pitch on decision day. But are they full strength? Can they go through this whole series and deliver the goods? I still don't think so. Seattle as well, a top 5 defense, very, very strong home form. And I think that's just going to give them the edge. If this, certainly they shouldn't be getting swept, but if in the potential that this goes to game 3, they get that home field advantage once again. I think they'll just get through. But this should be a tight series with limited goals, and that's where we're going with, especially in this first game, which is where our best bet is. For this game 1 in Seattle, we're going with the under 2.5, which we also took in some sense, if I remember right. Like I said, when these two teams met in Seattle about a month ago, Houston just couldn't get things going. They dominated the ball, and especially if they go down in this game, Seattle's just gonna let them have it. They like to play on the counter a little bit with a little bit more directness, but they also don't have exactly the best players suited for just finishing chances and really blowing away teams like some of these other top teams in the West. So that's where I just don't see there being many goals. I think if Houston gets something out of this game or escapes with this game, then it'll be in penalties on like a 1-1 or shutting Seattle out. I think a goal fest is not on the cards here, but the one thing I will say is of concern for Seattle in this game 1 where they could potentially be upset is that one of their best young players, Vargas, one of their kind of defensive mids, central mids, is suspended for this game. And they also have Atencio, one of their center mids, who could be a backup for him in concussion protocol. I don't think he's going to clear that, but you do have the prospect of João Paulo, one of their older guys, but a very key part of that midfield, potentially coming in to fill that. So even with Vargas missing and Atencio probably missing, João Paulo, I think, will be ready to go for this one. And so that shores up any issues I have with maybe their defensive structure should Houston be trying to, get through them. And on the other end, if Houston does take a lead in this game, I think either team taking a lead in this game doesn't really mean more goals, because on the other end, like Houston, they are known to also very much pack it up defensively. if they do take a lead, and they're very able and willing to do that should they want to protect the lead on the road. So I think this game in general, in the first game, will have very limited chances. Then we see how the rest of the series goes. But I do favor Seattle here just because of their health, because of how much they've been here under Schmetzer with this core group. And that would probably set up a meeting. If they do advance, that would set up a meeting with likely LAFC in that second round, which they also haven't been able to figure out. But you have to go series by series or round by round. And for me, I think Seattle gets this one done in 3 games. But yeah, I think they just sneak by Houston. Tuesday has the final 2 games of the game 1 of the series. First of which is the Crew hosting New York to start the series off. 2nd versus 7th in the East. Crew, obviously, your defending champs and the League's Cup champs of this season. They're going for the double this season and obviously defending their MLS Cup championship last year against Red Bull, who are on a 15-year playoff streak. That's a record, actually, in all American pro sports. I don't know if that's ever or current, just on current. But regardless, it's not as impressive when you consider it because they still have no MLS Cup. They have really, for the most part, stumbled in the playoffs when they have gotten to them year by year in this streak. And especially this year, they have really stumbled just getting into the playoffs. In the form since League's Cup, they have had 3 draws, 5 losses, and just 1 win since League's Cup. And that 1 win was on the road against Toronto, who was all but eliminated from the playoffs. The only thing going for them is that they have Forsberg back, and maybe he can cause some magic. We were on the Crew on decision day in this exact matchup, which is why I was targeting the Crew in that matchup, because they have every reason to want to play New York because they're just not in good form. The matchup suits them. They are now have won both games in the regular season against Red Bull. And attacking wise, even with Forsberg, I just don't get the sense that this Red Bull attack can overwhelm Columbus. Columbus has been prone to some pretty bad moments recently in terms of giving up goals. But I think this is one where, once again, they're just completely outmatched. On decision day when we took them, the Crew sent out kind of a B- type of squad with Cucho in there, though, and that was enough. They got a 2-0 lead. You sub off Cucho for Rossi or something like that. And yes, Red Bulls did come back to tie it with one of those being a penalty, but then the Crew still, when they get tested, they still seem to find a way to win the game. They got a late winner from Amundsen. And so regardless of maybe Red Bull could get on the score sheet here, Crew at home has just been a complete wagon. Obviously, there's the potential of Red Bulls locking it down and playing for penalties, but I just don't think they're gonna, with a full strength Crew team, gonna be able to escape with that. And there's, like I said, obviously also the possibility of Crew maybe getting a blunder or two. So regardless of which you see, Crew should be scoring 2 goals here, and that's where I'm going for our best bet. We have Crew money line and over 1.5, just to kind of ease the odds a bit, because I just don't see this being 1-0. Even if it takes maybe a little bit for Crew to figure them out, then like I said, they know how to close these teams out, even if they maybe let up a goal in the process. Maybe they ease off late, and they've had that kind of tendency to do that down the stretch of this regular season when they've taken big leads, like hosting Orlando on decision day, like we just talked about. But I see no issue with the Crew scoring 2 themselves. I don't want to bank on Red Bull scoring, but I just think there's multiple ways this comes out on our end. And just in general for this series, it shouldn't be that hard for the Crew to get by this Red Bull team. As strong as maybe they look defensively at the start of the season, they just don't have the offense to make up for it. They're really going to be hoping to escape and live on in these playoffs and through this series by limiting the Crew's offense and just really packing it in. Because if they even open up a little bit, I just don't see this being a very competitive series personally. Maybe they can steal one at Red Bull Arena, but for this first game, Crew at home, I'm gonna keep riding the defending champs to just do the business. Shouldn't be that difficult in my opinion. But yeah, for me, I still say 2-0 for the Crew, and congrats to the Red Bulls for your streak. But once again, it's just another pointless playoff appearance where you just go out in the first round. So yeah. To close out the first games of round one, and just to cover every series here, we end with RSL taking on Minnesota. It's the third versus sixth in the West. RSL won MLS Cup all the way back in 2009. Meanwhile, Minnesota, they've had a much shorter history in the league, 7 years before this one, and in 6 of those they have made the playoffs, but in all 6 of those they have failed to advance to that next round. So this is unprecedented territory for them in terms of going to the next round. And to me, they do have a lot of potential to make that history, so to speak. RSL has been very vulnerable down the stretch of the season. They haven't looked the same as they did when they went on an unbelievable unbeaten run, and then they sold Gomez in the transfer window, got some replacements, and they have loaded up in that sense, but the chemistry hasn't really built yet. The same attacking flair hasn't been there. The one constant has been Diego Luna, who is going to have to be the difference maker in this series. And Chicho Arango is going to have to show up as well, because he's been part of that. He's been constant in the terms of remaining with the team through the transfer window, but his form has completely fallen off a cliff. He has to be scoring goals. That's his job. And the offense and that type of home field advantage you get at RSL with that altitude, they haven't really taken advantage of that in terms of really putting it on teams. And these two teams met specifically a couple weeks before the season ended, and at RSL, and it was 0-0. So a bit of a tune-up, right, for this series, and Minnesota survived in that aspect. And if they could do that again, they would force penalties. So I'm sure they would be very happy with that. But it's two interesting sides, because RSL's form has dipped, yet they have this home field advantage, and Minnesota hasn't really been here before in terms of advancing, and they also have a first-year head coach in Eric Ramsey, who has certainly overperformed expectations with this team, and they've had a very successful transfer window with Yeboah mainly as that goal-scoring threat down the stretch here that has gotten them into sixth. But he hasn't experienced the playoffs before Ramsey as a coach, and it's two kind of conflicting storylines in that sense. So I see the potential for an upset, but Minnesota's defense also worries me. They have that attack. Meanwhile, in that game actually as well, Brian Vera, RSL's center back, spit on a Minnesota United player, and he's still suspended. He's going to be suspended just for this first game of the series. And so that's what could also give Minnesota the edge in terms of their attacking aspect. I really have no pure read on this series in terms of whether to or not to expect many goals, or how these teams will approach this, because RSL used to be good for many goals before that transfer window hit, but it's been very hard. They've been very hard to come by since then. But I hate to be boring, because I've really only picked one upset in this entire first round, and that's been Charlotte. But to me, RSL, I think their stars will just simply show up in terms of Luna and Chicho Arango. I think they've just had that little bit more of experience, and you're giving them. I think this is another situation where it maybe benefits the higher seed team that might be on upset watch, because they get those extra chances. And so it could be another deep series, but I think in the end, such as other series I've talked about, like Cincy NYC, where there's that potential upset, I think it actually benefits these higher seeds If it was a one-off, then you could maybe say, okay, there's a real possibility. But as these series progress, I think the better seeds will figure it out, and I think just in general, the top seed talent will be the difference in these matchups. But I would definitely not be surprised by maybe one or two more upsets than the only one I've called in Charlotte in this first round. I just think these series personally benefit the potential for just avoiding those kind of hiccups. So, we'll see how it all plays out. But I see RSL getting this through this series, not swimmingly, but with a 2-1 series result. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this full playoff preview. And like I said, I just think in general that, especially on these top end teams, we have some of the top attacking and just general talent that we've ever had in this league. And so for those higher seeds in each conference, I just feel like we're going to get the best out of them, and we're going to see some fantastic moments out of all these amazing players, especially the ones you see up on the graphic here. I think these stars are going to deliver for the most part, and the better teams are gonna come through and have deep playoff runs. And I think that's what we mostly want to see, unless you're a fan of one of these, other teams. But from a neutral perspective, it should be one of the best playoffs we've ever had in terms of a quality standpoint. And we'll see how many upsets there are. But regardless, going forward, I'm not sure about the scheduling of videos and things, because we do have this best of 3 round. Obviously, I'm going to make more videos as the playoffs go on for the following rounds, but I'm not sure about the schedule for this first round. I think we'll just kind of play it by ear and see whether or not we do more kind of just maybe betting focused videos for each game of this first round as they progress, or something like that. But regardless, we'll obviously be back at the very least ahead of the second round, which might be a little bit some time from now. But if anything, I'll post more updates on my Twitter, which you should be following anyways, for more updates, more bets, and just general MLS discussion. So make sure to go follow that at MLS Digest, and make sure to like and subscribe to the video if you've been enjoying the content, if you want to keep following along during these playoffs, which should be electric. And so, yeah, we'll be back in some form while these playoffs progress. So make sure to keep updated, keep the notification buttons on, and I'll see you for the next one, guys.